Hi, welcome to my November wrap up. It's probably incredibly late by the time I post this, almost the end of the year, even though it should have been the beginning of December, but got a little busy and a little sick, so yeah, we're just gonna get right into it. November was like a very short reading month. In fact, December will also be a short reading month with just everything I've had going on with holidays and just dealing with things like, cruises and such. So the first book that I read was What Stalks the Deep by Kingfisher. Okay, so that's like the third installment in a series. And for me, it was definitely my personal favorite so far of the series. They're all like very interesting, good books. But like for me, from like the plot, the characters, the setting, even like the banter and vibes of this specific one versus like the others that I've read, it held my interest really well and just so perfectly like integrated like the book in an entirety to be just such a good read. I would have given it 5 stars, but I didn't because of the ending. It was like a little rush. You go from like, and they're like smaller books, so you go from like kind of like stair stepping your story to just like a really quick ending. But overall, like I thought it, like I said, it was like my favorite so far of the series. It was a really great read. And I suggest pretty much anything I've read so far of Kingfisher. And this is definitely another suggestion. So one thing I'm doing now as well, and one of the reasons I've been so busy, is I started a podcast with one of my friends. If you want to go listen to it, you can listen pretty much anywhere, I'm pretty sure, that has like a podcast option. It's called The 90s Never Happened with me, Danielle Agan, and Bree Rose. So basically, a lot of my reading too was I had to read like 9 comics so far. Technically more now that we're like past November, but yeah, you'll hear about that in December. But I read like 9 Spider-Man comics. That's what we're starting with, is Spider-Man and the Carnage like storyline. So like, okay, they're fine. It's very 90s, so very dated, which I think is kind of like one of the many reasons I'm just not that into it. The very like dated verbiage and things like that. But that's kind of like the whole reason, by the way, for the podcast, is we're kind of like, being like a little mean over some stuff. But yeah, like it's fine. Like the story itself is fine. It's just, I'm very much more interested on when we get to like the X-Men stuff. So I also read People Watching by Hannah Bonam-Young. At this point, she literally cannot miss with a story. Everything that I have read so far from her is just great. Everything has been a 5-star read. She writes so well. And this isn't like a knock to like romance as a genre. It's just, I do feel like a lot of times if I pick up a romance book, a lot of them are getting DNF'd because it's either I've read this before with like different names or a different setting, or it just reads very dull for me. She makes the romance genre good for me. She really, like, she'll knock you off your feet with the love, story and things like that. There's something in her sauce that I will lap up every time. It's just, she's so good at what she does. I would recommend at this point anything she's written. It's just amazing. And another one that I would recommend is Love at First Sighting by Mallory Marlowe. She also, so far, I've read this book, The Love at First Sighting, as well as Love and Other Conspiracies. Both of them she's so good at, again, romance, but Mallory is so good at giving you a plot that isn't just running the race of the love story. You know what I'm saying? Like it's very clear that when she writes her plot, she's doing more than just, how do I get character A and B to the finish line? It's almost like that is like secondary at times, and I really appreciate that. Also, one of like the tropes that I really, really dislike is insta-love. It is in this book, but the way that she does it is very much, it's there, but the way that the characters have to go about like a yearning process, and it's not just so instant, like the smut doesn't happen instantly and things like that. I really appreciated the fact that despite the insta-love, which kind of made me like, oh no, she really pressed for it to be like more of like, yes, there's all these feelings, yes, it was instant, but here's all the yearning that's going to go with it before anything really happens. And I can appreciate that form of insta-love. I will say my one issue with the book though, and I still rated it 5 stars. Like, it's a great book, but like, the beginning is very slow to get going to the plot, but then, like, honestly, a little bit before the midway point, it starts to ramp up, and once it does, you get a really great story. You get, like, a good romance. You get all of that. So, you know, I'll happily accept a slow start for a fun plot. The last book, like I said, this will be, like, so short and so slow, like, so quick, not slow. The last book I read this month was 13 Months Haunted by Jimmy Juliano. Okay. So I got like 40% in. I finally found myself getting invested in the story, which usually by that point I have DNF'd books. Like, I'm going to be honest. Like, if you go through like my history of like the videos and things like that, most things that I DNF are usually between like, unless it's just like really bad, like first couple of chapters, I'm usually trying to get anywhere from like the 25 to 30% mark. I feel like that's a good chunk of book to know whether or not like I'm going to be into it. For some reason, this book made me like continue going. And like I said, once I got to about 40% or so, I found myself really invested. And I honestly, for what the story was, it was kind of like another, as you see, like I don't have any books this time. Everything was like a audiobook this month. So this is one of those, like, you know, I'm listening and things like that. But I found myself wanting to still get invested because yes, it was struggling to find its footing. And I think that's why I gave it like the extra time. Because this is a book that's like very anti-AI. It's trying to say something about that. And I wanted to see where the author went with this because it was, like I said, by the end of it, it was a good book. 3 stars is what I gave it. But a lot of the reasons, like the reason it got such a lower review for me, like 3 is pretty, I know it's like average, but that's low, for something that I'm like saying is like a decent book. But like for me, it had the slow start, which, it's like you could have edited some of the beginning to not do that. But also at the end, the overall like execution of the story, it lacked. I feel like you got like a really good middle and towards the end, but the actual like execution of that finale was just very lacking. Like even to the point where like for me, the epilogue was not needed. I feel like, to be quite honest, I took a whole point off for the epilogue alone because or a whole star, not point, because the epilogue was just unnecessary and it just kind of felt like it ruined where the story kind of got to at that last chapter. I feel like if they had stayed at that last chapter, it would have been a far more like poignant like story told. And then I only had one DNF this month, and it was You Again by Kate Goldbeck. And I'm going to be honest, I do try and read, like if I find like something is like Raylo coded, I'm going to read it. And this is like a Raylo coded book. This was not a good book. Like for one, I feel like the author thinks anything alternative is somehow something that should just be like overly sexualized or like, oh, look at them. They're so quirky for liking girls and boys. A lot of that kind of vibe, and it was just the main male, like, your romance, the obvious, like, who would be the romance guy, right? I'm all for, like, the, like, broody man. I'm all for, like, the morally ambiguous man, things like that. But this was just, every time that he was either speaking to her or we were, like, in her head, his head in the story, it was just very dull and just, like, boring. Dull and boring are the same word. But like, it just wasn't good. I could not find myself interested in it. And also too, like, the way that it's being wrote was not something I was enjoying because the author was basically just like, insert SpongeBob, like 2 years later, 3 years later. That's what it was doing, was you're getting like these little, to be honest, it reminds me of fanfic. I felt like each chapter was more or less just like slapping fanfic, like quick bits in, like, oh, this happened. And like one day we'll get to like the main story of the fanfic, right? So you're reading like, oh, this is how they met. Oh, now it's like a year later. Oh, now it's like a few months later. Oh, now it's like, I felt like I wasn't actually getting a plot. I felt like I wasn't actually getting a story. It just, nothing was grasping me. And on top of it too, like I said, like, both characters are unlikable, by the way, not just him, her as well. But like, you've got like these unlikable characters. There's nothing really like grasping you. And on top of it, I read like a good portion. I think I probably read like 15-20%. You're not learning anything about these characters other than like, wow, she's so quirky and he's so broody. I personally need more than that to continue. Like, I think it's like almost 400-page book. It wasn't working for me, especially with how cringe the banter was. It's not realistic the way they were speaking to each other for people who have just like really never been around each other. Like, it just overall for me was not enjoyable in any way, shape, or form. And so I DNF'd it. So like I said, short video. I'll obviously have like the books that I read like on the screen because they were all, audiobooks this time. But thank you for watching, and I hope you watch the next and subscribe. Bye!